The story of D-Day is often told through grand strategies and the clash of mighty armies. We remember the generals, the paratroopers, and the brave soldiers storming the beaches under fire. Yet, some of the most profound acts of heroism were quiet, almost invisible. They were born not from orders, but from the simple, brilliant thinking of one individual. This is the story of Thomas Becker, a frontline engineer whose name is not found in most history books. His small act of ingenuity, however, rippled across the sands of Normandy. It saved countless lives and reminds us that in the chaos of war, sometimes the simplest ideas are the most powerful. History is filled with tales of complex machines and elaborate plans, but on the ground, where life and death are separated by inches, innovation often comes from a different place. It comes from observation. It comes from understanding the natural world. Thomas Becker was not a high-ranking officer. He was a man with his hands in the dirt, tasked with a seemingly impossible job. His story is a testament to the power of looking at a problem differently. It shows us that true genius is not always about inventing something new, but about seeing the world with fresh eyes, even in the most desperate of moments. Becker's contribution was not a new weapon or a complex piece of technology. It was a simple trick, something anyone could do with just a bucket. Yet, this humble method proved more effective than the official, highly engineered tools of the time. It highlights a vital truth about conflict and, indeed, about life itself. The person closest to the problem is often the one best equipped to solve it. They see the small details that planners in distant headquarters might miss. They feel the sand, they see the water, and they understand the immediate life or death challenge in front of them. Today, on the 21st of November 2025, we look back at these events with the clarity of time. We can appreciate the scale of the D-Day landings and the courage it required, but it is equally important to remember the small human moments that made such a monumental undertaking possible. The story of Thomas Becker and his bucket of seawater is more than just a historical footnote. It is an inspiring lesson. It teaches us that one person's unique perspective, forged by their own life experience, can change the course of history in ways they may never have imagined. It celebrates the quiet, grassroots innovation that so often goes unnoticed. On the morning of June 6, 1944, the Allied forces faced a deadly and hidden enemy. The German defenders had turned the beaches of Normandy into vast minefields. They had buried thousands of telemines, powerful anti-tank devices designed to destroy vehicles and halt any advance. These mines were the first line of a formidable defense. For the Allied engineers, clearing them was a task of terrifying difficulty. The standard methods they had been trained to use were simply not working. The chaos of the landing, combined with the sheer number of mines, created a nearly impossible situation. The official technique for finding mines involved a device called a mine detector. This was a metal detector on a long pole. An operator would sweep it slowly over the ground, listening for a telltale buzz in their headphones. This method worked well enough on solid, dry ground, but the beaches of Normandy were a nightmare. They were a chaotic mixture of wet sand, shrapnel, and salt water. The detectors buzzed constantly, overwhelmed by the metallic debris of battle and the conductive seawater. Trying to find a mine in this environment was like trying to hear a whisper in a thunderstorm. It was slow, unreliable, and incredibly dangerous. Another method involved using a long, thin rod called a prod or bayonet. A soldier would lie on their stomach and carefully push the rod into the sand at an angle. They were feeling for the hard, unyielding surface of a mine casing. This was an act of extreme bravery and concentration. One wrong move, one push that was too hard or at the wrong angle, could trigger the device. In the heat of battle, with shells exploding and bullets flying, this slow, nerve-wracking process was almost suicidal. The engineers were exposed, vulnerable and moving at a snail's pace, while the invasion force waited behind them. The failure of these methods had dire consequences. The invasion depended on getting tanks, trucks, and heavy equipment off the beaches and inland, but with the exit routes blocked by hidden mines, the forces were trapped. Vehicles that tried to push forward were blown up, creating more wreckage and blocking the paths even further. The engineers were caught in a deadly paradox. They needed to clear the mines to allow the advance, but the advance could not happen until the mines were cleared. They were losing precious time, and more importantly, they were losing lives. The official rulebook had no answers for the brutal reality of the Normandy sands. Thomas Becker was not a career soldier. Before the war, he had spent his life on a farm in the American Midwest. His days were filled with practical tasks, not military drills. He understood the land in a way that most soldiers did not. He knew how to read the soil, how to watch the weather, and how to see the subtle signs of a changing landscape. He'd spent years observing how water flows across a field after a heavy rain. He knew that water finds the path of least resistance, but he also knew how it behaved around solid, buried objects. This deep, practical knowledge, gained over a lifetime of working with the earth, was about to become an unlikely weapon of war. On D-Day, Becker was an engineer tasked with clearing mines on Utah Beach. Like his comrades, he saw that the standard-issue detectors and prods were failing. He watched as men struggled, taking huge risks for very little progress. But while others saw only chaos and danger, Becker saw something familiar. He saw sand and water. He remembered his time on the farm, digging out rocks from a field before ploughing. He recalled how, after a rainstorm, the soil would settle differently around a buried stone. The water would drain away, but the earth directly over the stone would hold its shape just a little bit longer, creating a faint, almost invisible outline. This memory sparked an idea. The German teller mines were large, flat, and circular like a dinner plate. They were buried just a few inches beneath the surface of the sand. Becker reasoned that the sand directly over the solid, non-porous mine would behave differently than the sand around it. He wondered if there was a simple way to make this difference visible to the naked eye. He looked at the vast expanse of the English Channel lapping at the shore. The solution, he realized, might be right there in front of him. It was a simple, elegant thought, born from a farmer's intuition rather than a military manual. His mind connected two seemingly unrelated worlds, the peaceful fields of home and the war-torn beach of Normandy. The problem was the same in both places, finding a hard object hidden just beneath the surface. On the farm, the rain revealed the rocks. Here on the beach, perhaps the seawater could reveal the mines. It was a leap of logic that no military textbook could have taught him. It came from a lifetime of quiet observation and a deep, intuitive understanding of how the natural world works. In that moment of insight, Thomas Becker, the farmer, saw a solution that had eluded the military's top engineers. With his idea formed, Becker put it into action with the simplest of tools. He grabbed an empty helmet, some accounts say it was a bucket, and ran to the water's edge. He filled it with seawater and hurried back to a patch of sand where he suspected mines were buried. His fellow engineers must have watched with confusion, wondering what he was doing. They were trained to rely on technology and precise procedures, not on what looked like a child's game at the beach. But Becker ignored their stares. He had a theory to test, and he believed it could work. The lives of his friends depended on it. He began to pour the water gently over the sand. He did not dump it all at once. Instead, he let it flow in a wide, even sheet across the surface. The water soaked into the loose, dry sand almost instantly, disappearing from view. This was the key to his method. As the water was absorbed, the vast majority of the sandy area became uniformly dark and wet. However, something different happened in the exact spot where a mine was buried just below. The water could not soak through the solid, waterproof casing of the Teller mine. It was trapped for a moment on the surface. The result was astonishingly clear. As the seawater drained away into the surrounding sand, a faint, dark, circular outline would remain for a few crucial seconds. This dark, damp circle was the exact size and shape of the mine hidden beneath. The water sitting on top of the mine's surface took longer to either evaporate or run off to the sides than the water on the open sand, which drained straight down. Suddenly, the invisible enemy had a visible signature. It was a perfect temporary map showing exactly where the danger lay. The hidden mines were revealed not by a complex machine, but by a bucket of water and a farmer's cleverness. This simple trick was a revelation. It required no special equipment, no complex training, and no electricity. Any soldier with a bucket or a helmet could do it. Once the damp circle appeared, the engineers knew precisely where to probe. They could go straight to the edge of the mine, disarm it, and remove it safely and quickly. The process was transformed from a blind, terrifying guessing game into a methodical, visual task. Becker's seawater trick was a triumph of simple, observational science applied under the most extreme pressure imaginable. It was ingenious because it was, above all else, simple. The impact of Becker's bucket trick was immediate and dramatic. Where engineers had been struggling for hours, they could now find and clear mines in a matter of minutes. The news of this simple, effective method spread like wildfire along the beach. Engineers quickly abandoned their unreliable detectors and started grabbing buckets and helmets. What began as one man's quiet experiment soon became the standard, unofficial procedure for the units fighting to get off the sand. The trick addressed the core problems that had plagued the sappers from the moment they landed on the shores of Normandy. The first and most important advantage was safety. The seawater method allowed engineers to see the mines from a standing position. They no longer had to crawl on their bellies, slowly and blindly prodding the sand while exposed to enemy fire. By identifying the mine's exact location and outline, they could work to disarm it with a precision that was previously impossible. This drastically reduced the risk of accidental detonations. Fewer engineers were killed or wounded, which meant more men were available to continue the vital work of clearing paths for the troops and vehicles waiting anxiously behind them. The second major benefit was speed. Clearing a minefield is a race against time. Every minute, the invasion force remained bottlenecked on the beach, increased its vulnerability to artillery and air attacks. Becker's method was incredibly fast. A team of engineers could sweep a large area with buckets of water much more quickly than a single operator could with a detector. This rapid clearing of exit lanes allowed tanks, trucks, and artillery to finally move off the beach and push inland. The logistical jam was broken, and the momentum of the assault was restored, all thanks to this low-tech but highly effective innovation. This simple trick had a ripple effect that influenced the entire campaign. By speeding up the breakout from the beaches, it helped the Allied forces secure their foothold in France more quickly. This in turn saved lives not just among the engineers, but among the infantry and tank crews who were able to advance under the protection of their heavy equipment. The story of Becker's bucket trick became a piece of battlefield legend, passed down from one generation of combat engineers to the next. It serves as a powerful example of how adaptability and grassroots innovation are just as important as grand strategy in winning a war. The principle behind Thomas Becker's innovation did not fade away after D-Day. Its spirit lives on. It is a perfect example of what military thinkers call asymmetric thinking, using a simple, unexpected method to defeat a complex technological problem. This concept remains incredibly relevant in modern conflicts. Today's battlefields are saturated with high-tech sensors, drones, and electronic warfare systems. Yet time and again, simple, clever solutions prove to be remarkably effective. A modern analogy might be found in how insurgents use cheap, commercially available drones to counter billion-dollar military hardware, a true David versus Goliath scenario. The bucket trick itself is still remembered by combat engineers as a classic case study in battlefield ingenuity. It teaches a vital lesson. The official solution is not always the best solution. Troops are encouraged to think critically about their tools and their environment, to adapt and to innovate. The story of Thomas Becker is told to remind new soldiers that their own background, their own unique way of seeing the world, can be a powerful asset. Whether it is a farmer's knowledge of the soil or a mechanic's understanding of an engine, personal experience can lead to life-saving breakthroughs. This idea extends far beyond the theatre of war. In any large organization, from a corporation to a government agency, there is a tendency to rely on established rules and rigid procedures. Innovation can be stifled by bureaucracy. Becker's story is a powerful argument for empowering people at all levels to challenge the status quo and experiment with new ideas. It shows that the most valuable insights often come from the front lines, from the people who are dealing with the problem directly. A culture that listens to its Thomas Beckers is a culture that can adapt, survive, and thrive in the face of unexpected challenges. Ultimately, the legacy of the D-Day bucket trick is a universal one. It is a reminder that human creativity is our greatest resource. In a world increasingly dominated by complex technology, we must never forget the power of a simple, elegant idea. Thomas Becker was an ordinary man who found himself in an extraordinary situation. He did not have special tools or advanced training in physics. What he had was a memory of his farm, the courage to try something new, and a deep practical wisdom. His simple act of pouring seawater on the sand saved his friends and helped change the course of the war, leaving a lesson in ingenuity that is as powerful today as it was on the beaches of Normandy.